In April 2013, I went through something that I kept secret for years. I was paid a hefty sum of money in exchange for signing a 10-year non-disclosure agreement. Now that the time is up, I'm weighing my options. I could just let it go and never speak about it again, because there's nothing to gain and so much to lose. But then again, this is just an anonymous post on the internet. It's up to you to decide if you believe it or not. Back then, I was driving back from my Aunt Maggie's place in Corbin, Kentucky. She had fallen off a ladder a week before and broken her leg, so I went there to help her out with a few things. On my way back, I was driving down I-75. For an April evening, it was unusually hot. It all started with the radio. A Johnny Cash song I'd heard 100 times before was playing. The sound began to fade in and out, and then it just went completely silent. Up ahead, cars began honking their horns. The road turned chaotic as trees on both sides of the highway started swaying, even though there was barely any wind. Suddenly, a violent gust hit, pushing my car onto the opposite lane. I struggled to keep the wheel steady and regain control. I shut the sunroof just as a massive cloud of dust swept past, covering my windshield. Then came the rumble. It sounded like thunder, but it was coming from beneath the ground. It was a low, guttural sound, almost like a groan, growing louder and clearer with every passing second. At the sound's peak, I saw trees starting to topple, one after another. A small Kia ahead of me lost control and veered off the road, disappearing into the bushes. When the sound stopped, chaos erupted on the road. Some drivers desperately switched lanes, while others slammed on their brakes. My car door got scratched as the vehicle behind me tried to overtake. Over the radio, an automated message announced an emergency, calling it a geological hazard. A monotone voice instructed, "Attention, geological hazard. Turn off your air conditioning, reduce speed, and proceed to the nearest exit." Repeat, turn off your air conditioning, reduce speed, and proceed to the nearest exit. As time passed, traffic came to a standstill. Police had blocked all lanes in every direction. A few people tried to push through the barricades, but they were forced back at gunpoint. I saw officers in gas masks and riot shields, motioning us toward a specific direction. I reached an exit that led to an open field being used as an improvised parking lot. Officers were directing cars to park so tightly that no one could open their doors unless they were on the edge of the rows. There were 4 rows of vehicles, with around 10 to 15 cars in each. Cars that didn't fit were directed further down the road. The parking lot was packed. I ended up stuck in the second row, surrounded by 6 other vehicles. Almost everyone around me was talking on their phones. I had no one to call, but it seemed like there were signal issues anyway. The radio kept repeating the emergency announcement. Voices around me were getting louder. A man 2 cars to my left cracked his door open and started yelling at the officers in uniform, demanding answers. They immediately responded with a warning shot into the air. "Stay in your cars," they shouted. "Close your doors. I won't repeat myself." A few people were trying to record everything, but there seemed to be issues uploading the footage. The internet speed was laughably slow. After a while, all phone signals were completely blocked. I think 1 or 2 videos of the officer firing into the air might have made it online, but that was it. The police patrolled the area. We were ordered to stay in our cars, lock the doors, roll up the windows, and turn off the engines. I could hear people in nearby cars talking. Someone mentioned a natural gas leak caused by a geological disaster and speculated that running car engines might trigger an explosion. Others were discussing the possibility of a terrorist attack. There were no answers, and the police refused to explain anything. About an hour later, the situation worsened. People were hungry, thirsty, and exhausted. One of the officers, wearing a gas mask, approached the front cars, handing out bottled water, crackers, and chocolate bars. He had to climb over hoods and roofs, scratching them with the steel spikes on his boots. He had to climb from one car to another, scratching the hoods and roofs with the steel spikes on his boots. They also handed out black plastic sanitary bags for people who needed to relieve themselves. "Use these, seal them up, and throw them outside. Then lock your doors and wait," one of the officers ordered. I climbed into the back seat, took off my cap, and tried distracting myself by playing games on my phone. but the battery was draining fast, so I decided to conserve it and instead closed my eyes to rest. Sweat burned my eyes, not because it was hot, but because I was anxious. No matter what I did, I felt trapped. The car seemed smaller and smaller with every passing minute. I couldn't get out even if I wanted to. It physically hurt to think about how little control I had over the situation. Maybe this is what claustrophobia feels like. Ahead of me, a few officers were discussing something. One of them had a white cotton glove, which he used to wipe the hood of one of the front cars. Then he took off the glove, put it in a bag, and sealed it tightly. I got the feeling that our cars were covered in something. I wasn't the only one who noticed. In the car to my left, 2 college students were discussing it as well. Anthrax, maybe? One of them said. No, it's gold dust, the other smirked. They just don't want to share. Do you think that's what it is? The first one asked. I hope so, but I doubt it. Yeah, screw you. Soon I joined their conversation and offered my own theory. It's something flammable, something that could explode if we start our cars, I suggested. My theory seemed to resonate with them. In the car behind me, there was a man in his 50s, sitting with what looked like his daughter. He held up a notepad with the words, "If they won't tell us what it is, it could be aliens." I couldn't tell if he was serious, but neither of them were laughing. Other cars had their own share of characters. A man in a black shirt who looked like a train conductor, 2 middle-aged women with a child in the back seat, a hefty guy blasting some loud folk music, and a couple with a teenage son who wouldn't stop drumming on the window. We'd been sitting there for about 2.5 hours when a truck pulled up. It was one of those vehicles with a massive water tank, completely unmarked. It looked oddly out of place. When it came to a stop, the officer started shouting through a megaphone, "We're going to hose down your cars, so please close your doors and roll up your windows. Then, we'll cover your vehicles with a protective film while they dry. After that, we'll begin releasing you in an organized manner." I repeat. Most of us felt a wave of relief. Now it was just a matter of time. The sky was growing darker. The officers climbed onto the cars and began hosing them down meticulously. It smelled like chlorine, though perhaps something else had been mixed into the water. An officer climbed onto my car to check the sunroof. Once he confirmed it was sealed, he sprayed the car, enveloping it in a chemical stench that clung to the air and burned the back of my throat. This process took a while, at least an hour or 2. Afterward, they began rolling out a massive plastic covering, similar to pool covers or those tarps used on football fields during rain. Using 2 patrol cars, they carefully stretched the plastic across the entire area, securing the edges with large stones. "Please remain calm," they shouted as they worked. "We understand this is inconvenient, but it's for your safety. Do not exit your vehicles. Once everything dries, you'll be free to leave." I repeat. I did as I was told, staying inside and watching the plastic slowly cover my car. It felt like being buried alive. The light disappeared, leaving me in total darkness, accompanied only by the muffled voices of others. The students in the car beside me were talking about where they'd go after this. Someone honked their horn, whether as a sign of support or frustration, I couldn't tell. Someone even started clapping. I took my last sip of water and slid back into the driver's seat. I could hear them finishing up the tarp, waiting patiently, guessing it would take another hour or so. They didn't give us any specific time frame, but I felt a slight sense of relief. Even so, I kept shifting in my seat, gripping the steering wheel, feeling trapped in a metal coffin. It was so dark and everything reeked of plastic and chemicals, like being stuck inside a car wash frozen in time. When the panic subsided a little, I began to focus on the background noises, trying to filter out the conversations from the cars around me. In the distance, I heard raised voices. It wasn't the people in the cars, but the police. Whatever they were discussing, it was a heated debate. Hours passed and people were losing their patience. More cars were honking, others were shouting for answers. I couldn't stop the trembling in my legs. The more I thought about how to get out of here, the smaller the car felt. I was hyper-focused on things I couldn't control. I was thirsty, but there was no water left. I needed to go to the bathroom, wanted to stretch my legs, get some fresh air, and get rid of the awful chemical aftertaste in my mouth. I heard a truck with a tanker start up and drive away. "Attention! Please stay in your vehicles," shouted a voice through a megaphone. "Do not exit under any circumstances. Stay in your vehicles." I heard a few cars leave, and then silence fell. The police had left us alone. Everyone grew quiet. Some people turned on their phones, using them as flashlights to look from car to car. I saw a sea of vehicles, all of us trapped under this dark cover. I saw faint lights, broken by sharp silhouettes in the darkness. I couldn't tell who they were. And then I heard a heavy sigh from behind me and the clanking of metal, just like when the officers climbed onto our cars to give us water. But this time, instead of that, I heard thuds and shouts that slowly faded away. As more and more footsteps started stomping on our cars, the silhouettes in the other vehicles remained still. We all held our breath, waiting for an answer. What the hell was going on? What were those sounds? Somewhere to my right, I heard the voice of an older man, someone I had seen earlier in that pickup truck. In response, the footsteps stopped and a faint clicking sound followed, as if someone was absent-mindedly clicking their tongue against the roof of their mouth. Then, in the distance, another click responded, then several more, followed by dozens, maybe hundreds. To my right, a horrible metallic sound rang out, followed by the crunch of glass and a scream that abruptly stopped. After that, several uneven honks echoed. One of the silhouettes in front of me turned into a blurred patch as something sliced through the pale blue glass and ripped through the plastic sheet somewhere in the first row. The car's roof was pierced through. Someone disappeared from their place 2 cars away from me, breaking more glass. The sound was like a wild animal had gotten inside. I thought I saw red splatters on the window next to the passengers. The air was running out. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, and my hands started trembling, clutching the steering wheel in a spasm. Sweat trickled down my shoulders. I couldn't control it. I couldn't even see what was happening, but these sounds, these screams, triggered my primal instincts. This was danger, a threat, and my body knew it long before my mind did. The students in the car next to me ducked down. One of them waved at me, as if telling me to hide. I nodded and started crawling into the back seat. I couldn't see where I was placing my hands and feet. Everything looked different in the dark. As I climbed over, my leg accidentally hit the car's horn. It was a quick press for a fraction of a second, but for me, it was the loudest sound in the world. I lay on my stomach on the back seat, and within seconds, something heavy crawled onto the hood of my car. I felt the car tilt. From the sensation, this creature was much heavier than a person. I pressed my palms to my mouth, my nose burned, and I bit my tongue, listening to every metallic sound, as whatever was outside moved around. Everyone fell silent, and I pressed myself against the door behind the driver's seat, hoping not to be seen from outside. I heard the car frame creak as something slowly moved and crawled toward my hatch. When it stepped on it, a small crack appeared. The sound made it stop. Another crack, and I silently shook my head, as if trying to tell the glass to stop. Just a bit more, and the hatch would crack completely. It happened. My legs were covered in glass when this unclear entity, wrapped in plastic, fell onto the front seat. It jerked, twisted, and clicked. The beast screamed and tried to connect with other creatures, while simultaneously carving its way through the plastic. Strange sounds came from all sides. Something crawled from one car to another. I swung my arms, accidentally slicing my thumb on the broken glass. I managed to open the passenger door, but even squeezing through the gap between the student cars, there wasn't enough space to get outside. But I had to try. I exhaled all the air from my lungs to squeeze through, and to my surprise, I managed to do it while the creature overturned the interior of my car. I felt my eyes cloud over with a film. I don't know whether it was from the chemicals or fear, but I lost consciousness. I was brought back to my senses by the honking of a car horn, which the creature probably triggered in the cabin. My face lay on the gravel of the makeshift parking lot, feeling the burn from the remnants of the chemicals. I held back my instinct to run and stayed lying on my stomach, forcing myself not to move. More and more unfamiliar creatures gathered under the car. Some climbed in, some climbed out. The car pressed against me as the creature angrily searched for an exit. I could hear the students whispering to each other, trying to stay calm. One reassured the other, saying that all they had to do was stay quiet, not stick their heads out, and wait. Then, something hit the door I had escaped from. The door was pressed against the neighboring car, then fell clumsily to the ground, completely torn off its hinges. A black, bird-like paw touched the ground near me. 3 fingers in front, 1 behind, each with a long claw. It was heavy, at least 200 kilograms. If the clicking sound came from its mouth, I can guess that it was around 2 meters tall, or maybe even taller. How did it even fit through the small hatch of my car? It slowly moved from my car to the others, as if hunting for its prey. I could barely see anything in the darkness, but the creature seemed to navigate perfectly in it. It didn't crash into anything. Behind me, someone tapped on the broken glass of the car and let out a frightened, short scream. And the hunt continued. This time, everything was different. It must have triggered some horrific response because suddenly the plastic film started ripping to the right and left, and people began scrambling out of their cars. I heard someone step on the broken glass, and someone else tried to open a door, banging it against other cars. In the distance, gunshots started. The students who were next to me slammed the doors and followed my lead. They crawled to the ground and slid under the car. There was a little more light coming through, as the plastic above them had been torn. Their faces were red from tears, and one of them desperately tried to call for help on the phone, while the other grabbed the phone from his hand. A short scuffle broke out, which ended with them turning on music and throwing the phone as far left as they could. The car under which the phone landed was immediately attacked. Every window was shattered and all the passengers vanished from sight. I heard a screeching sound when the seats were torn in half and thrown out onto the street in seconds. The whole car was torn apart into pieces by dozens of these creatures that swarmed inside. "Shut up," repeated one of the students. "Shut up, shut up, shut up." 12. Something crawled under my car. It scraped against the sole of my boot, puncturing a hole right down to my big toe. I rushed forward, slinking like a lizard. The students noticed and followed my lead. I don't think they were thinking too much about it, it was just a herd instinct. I passed 2 more cars, and the first one got stuck in my path. There was something dark, and I couldn't get around it without risking my life. I couldn't figure out what it was, but it didn't take long to realize. A sickening crunch of flesh echoed, like someone was biting into chunks of meat. It was trying to gnaw through the clothes, making a crackling sound as the threads gave way. A pool of blood slid under the car, splattering on my fingers, still warm. I crouched, trying to keep breathing, staying there, waiting for a chance, any chance for escape. I lay under the car for at least half an hour, hearing every bite, every crack of bones, the creaking of tendons. When it finished its meal, the creature left, dragging the remains with it. The body continued moving forward. Something heavy passed over the car I was hiding under, dragging the body with it. After a while, the steps faded, and it was silent again. In that silence, I found my footing. I crawled to the edge of the film and listened one last time. Pushing aside a stone, I slipped through the film. And just like that, the creatures were gone, and I was free. I felt the weight lift from my chest, and I could breathe again. I almost wanted to cry from the relief. A breeze dried the sweat on my skin and carried the scent of grass. Catching my breath, I turned back to the sea of cars to see how bad the damage was, and that's when I saw one of them. He stood a bit to the side, sitting on the roof of an old Honda. At first glance, it looked like a tall man covered in black tar, but as I looked closer, I could make out strange bird-like legs, sharp claws, and a long row of shark teeth in an unnaturally wide mouth. I froze. The creature stood up to its full height. It looked ready to pounce on me. I had no way to defend myself, and I couldn't make any sudden moves. I wouldn't even have time to hide halfway under the car before the creature would be on top of me. 100 thoughts rushed through my head, but I couldn't do anything. I had no options, but it just stared at me. The beast picked up a piece of raw meat, blood dripping onto the plastic film. It stared at me with curiosity as it took a bite, and then, without any apparent reason, it left. Full, I remained there, trembling like a dry leaf. When the last of the creatures disappeared, all that was left was panic. Soon, people in uniform returned. This wasn't the police anymore. The plastic film was removed. but we couldn't go back home. Not after all of this. Some signed a waiver and were immediately released. They weren't allowed to speak about what they had seen. Instead, they were paid a large sum of money. Others demanded answers, and they were handcuffed and thrown into a van. The wounded were examined by medics. In total, 14 people died. The causes of death were a combination of factors: the traffic jam, carbon monoxide poisoning, the animal attack, and it seemed there was something hidden in the official reports. Errors were everywhere, and the times were listed incorrectly, stretched over several days to fit smoothly into accident statistics. And if you wanted to go home and get your money, you had to sign a non-disclosure agreement. I signed it myself. I know the students signed it too. It's a miracle they survived, but I saw them. 34 cars, 18 people injured, 6 seriously, 4 lost at least one limb. One guy had his arm torn off up to the shoulder. I don't know how he survived. Most people never even saw these creatures up close. They only remember the screams and broken glass. Sometimes at night, that's all I hear. Closing my eyes, I remember lying under those cars, feeling the pressure on me. I still find it hard to breathe. I think part of me is still stuck there. It stayed in that car,